Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Chaf Dalid contains two sugyas. The first sugya is looking for a source for the Iser Hana of two things, chametz on Pesach and a shar haniskal, an ox that killed somebody and therefore has to be stoned. The Gemara has already given three potential sources for its Iser Hana. The Gemara has shown that there's a Tana that doesn't hold of any of them, and the Gemara is looking for the source in that Tana's opinion. In the second half of the daf, we'll discuss when you are eating something or having Hana from something which is forbidden, but you're doing it in an abnormal way. When does that violate the Iser, and when then does not violate the Iser Daraisa because it's too abnormal? So first of all, we're looking for the source for these halachas, these two things which are asur b'hana. The Torah only says about them that you shouldn't eat them. It doesn't say that it's asur b'hana. We know that the halacha, though, is that it is asur b'hana. We're looking for the source. We've already given three sources, but we've brought a brisa that shows that none of these sources fit with this particular Tana, and now the Gemara is looking for the source. So what we're going to do here, we're going to have four sources, all in a very similar structure, and all facing the same basic problems. The sources are all from the halachas of karbanos, kachim. And in each of these it says, redundantly, it says you have to burn it, and it says you shouldn't eat it. And as a matter of fact, some of them even have additional sources that you have to destroy it. So because there's these redundant expressions, you have to burn it and you can't eat it. Obviously, if you're burning it, you can't eat it. And we have other even proofs that you have to burn it and you aren't allowed to eat it. So we say in Eina Inin, we say there's a extra expression here in this halacha, and that is meant to apply somewhere else completely. It's meant to apply to the halacha of a shar niskal and chametz on Pesach, that you're allowed to, that you have to destroy them and you cannot have hana from them. Now, each of these sources we have the following thing. We're going to have to show that there's a redundancy, that the same halacha is said twice. We're also going to have to show that the halacha that here, in this particular case, it has to be burned, does not apply elsewhere. Elsewhere, it's just an Iser Hana, not that it actually has to be burned. And the Gemara's rejection will be that we need this extra pasuk for some additional halacha, which we haven't seen otherwise. That's going to be the structure in all of them. So let's go through. The Gemara's first source, which begins at the bottom of Daf Chav Gimel, is about a chatas pasel, where you have a carbon chatas. It became a pasel for whatever reason. The case the Gemara is discussing is that his blood was brought into the Kodesh, into the Ohel Moed, where it wasn't supposed to be. And we have two psukim that say it has to be burned. One in which Moshe is upset at Aaron for burning it, even though it was not pasel, which clearly shows that if it is pasel, it's supposed to be burned. And also it says ba'esh tisarif. It has to be burned in fire. So the Gemara says you have an extra pasuk. If it doesn't belong here, it's applying to something else, and therefore it's referring to other isurim in the Torah, where just as you're not allowed to eat it, here also it says you're not allowed to eat it. It says lo sochal, lo seyachel, and it's referring to all of these other places, and it's adding in Iser Hana in these places themselves. Now, you may think that you should also have a obligation to burn it, just like here in the case of Chatas Pasel, you have an obligation to burn it. The Gemara therefore says no. The pasuk says "Ba'kodesh ba'esh tisarif." Only something which is holy has to be burned. This has to be burned, but other things do not have to be burned. It's enough to just avoid having hana from it. Now, the Gemara rejects this pshat because the word "Ba'kodesh" and "Ba'kodesh ba'esh tisarif" cannot be used to teach me that other halachos don't require burning. The phrase "Ba'kodesh ba'esh tisarif" is coming to teach me that things which do have to be burned have a specific place in which they're supposed to be burned. And that is holy things which have to be burned, has to be burnt in the Azara, in the Beis Hamikdash. As far as this halacha, the Gemara explains there are two levels of kedusha. There's kachim, there's kachei kachim, high level kedusha, that refers to high level karbanos like achatas and ola and asham, certain ashamim, and the kamitza of a karban mincha. All these things have to be burnt in the Azara. Lower level kedusha are called kachim kalim. They can be eaten anywhere outside the Beis Hamikdash and the rest of Yerushalayim. Therefore, they can be burnt in other places also. They're burnt in the Makom Hadeshen, a special place set aside for the waste of karbanos. So those things, the lower level kedusha can be burned outside. The higher level kedusha has to be burnt in the Makom, in the place of the kedusha. The one exception is the emurim of kachim kalim, the parts of the lower level karbanos which do go in the mizbech themselves. They get kedusha, they transfer to kachim once the blood of the kachim kalim is sprinkled on the mizbech. Then they become kachim. So they themselves also have to be burned in the special place of kedusha. But these halachas are all learned from B'Kodesh B'Eish Tisarif. Therefore, B'Kodesh B'Eish Tisarif cannot be used to teach you, as we are claiming, that other Isurim in the Torah do not require burning, they just have an Isur Hana. So therefore we need a new source for this entire halacha. So the Gemara goes to another pasuk, and this is the pasuk describing nicer leftover kabbanis that are around past their time. And about this it says, Lo ye'achel, cannot be eaten, and it says, V'sarafta, has to be burnt. Now that's redundant. If it has to be burnt, it definitely can't be eaten. So why do you need to tell me that? So the Gemara says, so the extra phrase is Imena Inyan, has to apply elsewhere, and it's going to apply to these halachas. Other halachas in the Torah that cannot be eaten, where there's an Isser Achila, also have an Isser Hana. So that's going to be our source. So the Gemara says, for this also we'll need to show that the other halachas don't have to be burnt, they just have an Isser Hana. So for that we have Im Yivaser, that we have Visarafta es hanoisar, but you should burn the noiser, the leftover. Only these things have to be burned. Other things may have an Isser Hana, but they don't have to actually be burnt specifically. Says the Gemara, you can't do this because this lo ye'achel is not extra. You're claiming this lo ye'achel is extra. It's not. Rabbi Elazar says this lo ye'achel is used to apply a lav to eating nosar. Nosar, leftover foods, you would think is just an iser asay. You're supposed to burn it. If you eat it, obviously you didn't burn it, so that would be a violation of a mitzvah asay. Saying lo yachal applies a lav on top of the asay, and if it's needed, it's not extra. So the Gemara brings its third attempt. The Gemara says, let's go back to our previous discussion of a chatas, pasuk carbon chatas that got upsol. Over there, not only does it say that Moshe was upset that it was burned at the wrong time, not only does it say B'Eish Tisarif, it also says Lo Ye'achel. So that's a third line, that's for sure extra. You don't have to say that, that's an extra phrase, and therefore Imene Inyan, same structure, it applies to other Isuri Achila in the Torah that they also have an Isur Hana. How do you know it's not supposed to be burnt? Oh, so that will use the pasuk of Nosar. We know we can't use B'Kodesh B'Eish Tisarif anymore. We'll use the pasuk of Nosar. Only Nosar has to be burnt, not other Yisurim in the Torah that are connected to Kachim like this. So that's where we're going to get that from. So Gemara says this approach doesn't work either because that Lo Ye'achel is also not extra. You know what that Lo Ye'achel is for? That Lo Ye'achel is to apply a specific lav on this specific halacha. The lav we had so far from before, from the previous Lo Ye'achel, was just on all nosars, all karbanos, all things, all kachim meat which is not used properly. It's a very general lav. We want to apply a specific lav. Why do we want to do that? Because the general lav you can't get malchus for. By making a specific lav here, specifically on this chatas, which is puzzle, so that makes it something that you can get malchus for. And therefore we need to apply it, and therefore the word Lo Ye'achel is not extra anymore. So the Gemara is going to go to its fourth and final attempt using this structure. And the Gemara now is going to refer to basar tamei. We have a pasuk that says basar she'iga b'chol tamei lo ye'achal b'eish yisarif. Kachim that becomes tamei, it says don't eat it; it has to be burnt. Again, it's redundant. If it's going to be burnt, obviously it can't be eaten. Now that's not extra. That's not going to help me because we already said you need that to add a lav, and we have to have it there also to make it a specific lav. But there's another source that this thing is usher. You cannot have hana from it, and that is that there is a kal v'chomer from meiser. Meiser sheni, the Torah says, if it became tamei, you can't eat it. How do you know? Because it says in your vidui meisers, when you bring the meiser sheni to the Beis Hamikdash, you say lo bi'arti mimenu bitamei. I didn't do anything with it while it was tamei. So there you see that you can't eat Meiser Sheni when it's Tamei. Now, if you can't eat Meiser Sheni when it's Tamei, you certainly can't eat Karbanos when it's Tamei. Karbanos are much more Chamor, much stricter rules than Meiser Sheni. Therefore, what do you end up having? You have an extra lav. You already know that it has to be destroyed. It says lo sisarf. You already know that you can't eat it, and that there's a lav on it from the kal v'chomer. So you have an extra lo yochel that's going to be applied to elsewhere in the Torah. Now the Gemara says maybe you'll tell me that the kal v'chomer is no good because you cannot warn somebody not to do nisa with a kal v'chomer. We have a rule ein mazhirin min adin. A kal v'chomer is not enough to serve as a warning that something is forbidden. So Gemara says the truth is kal v'chomer is not just a kal v'chomer; it's also a hekesh. Hekesh is where the Torah puts two halachos together. It links them, and you can learn from one to the other, and that you could use as your original warning. What's the link? The link is from the pasuk that says lo sucha lechol b'sharecha ma'aser degoncha v'tireshecha v'yitzarecha b'charis b'charcha v'tzaynecha v'chol nidarecha asher tidor v'nidvaysecha. So here you have ma'aser degoncha and the same pasuk together with nidarecha and nidvaysecha. So you have ma'aser sheni together with karbanis. Those are linked together, and whatever halacha you learn from one applies to the other, and therefore you see from that the two have the same halachas, they're linked, and therefore just like meiser sheni cannot be eaten when it's tamei, karbanis cannot be eaten when they're tamei either. Therefore we have an extra source. What's the extra lo sochal for? It must be applying to other isurim in the Torah, and that's what we're going to use to teach me that there's an isur hana and other isurim. Again, we have to show that it doesn't have to be burnt. We'll go back to the pasuk of noisar. Only noisar has to be burnt. Other isurim in the Torah do not have to be burnt. And where it says again you can't use it because maybe we want to have two lavin. Maybe the extra lo sochal is coming to teach me that two lavin apply to this, the specific lav and the general lav, and now we want to add on here another second lav that applies here because there are some averos that have multiple lavin. Like Abaye has said, if you eat a creepy crawly, a sheretz of the water, it's 4 lavin. You eat a sheretz of the ground like an ant is 5 lavin, and if you eat a flying sheretz like a bee or a hornet, so that would be 6 lavin. So the Gemara says, no, this is not a taina. This we're not going to accept because we only say that you want to add multiple lavin where you have no other explanation as to what it's for. Here we have another explanation. It's to teach me Isser Hana and other halachos in the Torah, and therefore that's what we're going to use it for. Okay, the Gemara accepts that. Now you have a source for the Isser Hana in the other halachos, which we're applying to Shara Niskal and Chametz on Pesach. The Gemara now says, let's analyze this pasuk a little more closely. It says, "V'habasar she'yigav chal tamei lo yachal." Meat which touches anything tamei cannot be eaten, but ishu serve has to be burned in fire. V'habasar kol tahar yochal basar. And the meat which is tahar, you can eat the meat. And there's a lot of extra meat here. It says, "V'habasar, v'habasar, v'habasar." What are all these v'habasars for? The Gemara says we're going to learn things out of this. The first v'habasar is to include wood of the mizbeach and levona, spices on the mizbeach. They have the halacha of food because of their great love, chibas hakodesh, because of their great kedusha. They have halachas of food, and they're included in this as well. What's the second v'habasar for? That's to include the imurim of karbanos. Imurim, the parts that go on the mizbeach, those also have this halacha of tama if they become tamei. Now you couldn't learn that out of the other meat because it's not counted amongst the other meat. The other meat refers to meat that kohanim are allowed to eat. Imurim kohanim are not allowed to eat, and therefore they're not included in the word meat. You have to have a repetition of the word v'habasar in order to include them as well. The Gemara asks, why do we need v'habasar for the imurim? We have a different source for imurim. We have v'hanefesh shesochal basim mizevach hashlav masher Hashem. That is listed elsewhere as a source that the sacrificial parts, the parts that go on the mizbeach, are forbidden to be eaten when somebody who is tamei. So we only need two sources about it. So Gemara says there's two different halachos. One is that if the person who's eating it is tamei, he gets kares. The other is that if he's tahar, but the meat is tamei, then there's a lav to eat that meat. That's why we need the two sources. This concludes the Gemara's discussion about the sources for the Isser Hana. Now the Gemara discusses what type of usage actually violates the Isser. So it's Rabbi Avo, and there's two versions of what he says. Rabbi Avo is quoting Rabbi Yechanan. According to the first version, he says if you eat something you're not allowed to eat, you're only asked if you eat it in the normal way. If you eat it in an abnormal way, for example, if you eat raw fats, so nobody eats fats raw, eat raw chalev, that's not an Isser D'Oraisa. The second version is that he's referring to Hana, and he says that if you get Hana from it, if you use it in a non-normal way of using it, that's also not an Isser D'Oraisa. What would an example of that be? If you take fats and instead of using it to smear kalim or whatever you use it for, you use it as medicine on a cut. So that people do, but it's not the normal thing that you would do with fats, and therefore it's not an Isser Daraisa. Certainly, according to this, if you ate it raw, it would certainly not be an Isser Daraisa. The Gemara now has a couple of supports to this halacha. The Gemara quotes Rav Acha bar Avia, the Rav Asi, and Rav Yechanan, who says, if somebody puts chelev, fat of a shor haniskal, which is Asr b'hana, if he puts that on his wound, he doesn't get an Isser Daraisa because it's not the normal way of using it. And Rabbi Zera says, I see a similar halacha from Arla. Arla, it says that if someone eats Arla fruits, he gets malchus. If somebody drinks juice of olives or grapes, that's Arla, he gets malchus. However, the juice of berries, figs, and pomegranates, which are not normally juiced, that's not an Isser Daraisa. Why not? Must be because that's not the normal way of using it. Just like we said, Abbas is not necessarily. The juice of these fruits doesn't count as juice at all. It doesn't count as food. It's not food. It's just mol ba'alma. It's just some remnant of it. It doesn't count as eating the fruit itself. It's not about normalcy. It's about that this does not carry the halacha of the fruit. Okay, now the Gemara says there's actually an exception to this rule. There are some things which, even if you use it abnormally, you still have the Isser Daraisa, and that's where it doesn't say not to eat it or not to get it. No, instead it says that it's kodesh. What's that? Kilayim, where you have certain types of vegetables together with grapes. It says that there is kelayim, it becomes hukdosh, becomes kodesh. Kodesh is a word for iser, it becomes forbidden. And once it's forbidden, that's in any way, in any type, in any shape, in any form. It doesn't matter if you're using it correctly or not. On that, the Gemara asks a kasha from another place where we see the usage of the word kodesh. It's a long kasha. We're not going to get to the end of it in this daf, but we'll begin it. The kasha is the word kodesh is used about basar b'chalav, about meat and milk together. It says, Ki am kodesh ata l'Hashem nekacha, you're holy people to Hashem your God. Those of Asher gedi b'chalev yima, you should not cook meat and milk together. And it also uses the word kodesh, talking about treifa. Anche kodesh tiyani, you're holy people to me. Basar b'chalav treifa lo yisachel, you shouldn't eat treif meat in the field. Linking the two together teaches me that there is an isser to eat basar b'chalav. Now, how do you know that there's an Isser Hana? So according to this version, the Gemara says that the Isser Hana is learned out of a Kal V'chomer from Arla. The creation of Arla doesn't involve any Avera. All he did was plant a tree. It becomes Asr because that's how Arla works. It becomes Asr automatically the first 3 years. So that, nevertheless, is Asr B'Hana. So Basar B'Chalav mixed and a meat and milk cooked together, which is an Avera to do the cooking, certainly should be Asr B'Hana.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.